Hello, everybody. If you can hear us, please go ahead and type in the chat function to the right. If you go ahead and type in the chat function to the right your name and let us know what school you are joining from. We'll give everybody just a minute or two to type and join in case there's any technical difficulties. But if you are here, please let us know in the chat function. I'll go ahead and type one comment just for an example so you'll see where it will pop up. Okay, great. I see Sylvia from the Cannon School is here. Oh, and also, if you don't mind indicating your language, what language you're teaching and what your school will be presenting in, that would help us know as well. Thank you. All right, well, I think we probably have some more people logging in and typing. For now, I'll go ahead and introduce myself while we're waiting. I'm Noel Bynum. I am the International Education Program Coordinator with the Center for European Studies at Chapel Hill. I'm one of the program coordinators putting on the LTL conference. I've worked with the conference for 3 years now. This is my 3rd year. So I'm really happy to be working with it again. You've been in touch with my colleague Emma a lot. She's been in charge of our pre-communications. So I'm sure that you've gotten to know her pretty well, but also feel free to email me with questions. And today's webinar is designed to give you a little more details about the competition itself, and also a few pointers and guidelines on how your students might be successful. And I'm also joined today with a colleague from the UNC Library, Teresa Chapa. And she will be giving some more guidance a little later on creating the research project, how to use good sources, more about the content part. And I am going to go over the parts about the competition itself, what to expect in terms of judging, and other expectations for the day, more of the logistical parts. Okay, great. I see another teacher here. We have Myra with Spanish. And also, too, as a reminder, if everybody, even if you don't have questions, please just state that you're here and where you're from, what language you're teaching, because that helps us know who is here. We will be giving teachers CEU credits for participation, but we'll only give CEU credits if we know that you are actually participating. So please confirm your name over in the chat function. If you're having issues with that, you're also welcome to email me. I've got my email available here. So if you can't figure out the chat function, you can also send me an email at nlbynum, B-Y-N as in Nancy, U, and then M as in mother, at email.unc.edu. Feel free to shoot questions there if you're having issues with the chat function, but chat function is the best way, if you can, to keep our conversations there. All right. Well, I think we will have a few more teachers joining us. Maybe we're having a few technical issues because I know this isn't everybody yet. But I do want to go ahead and get started. So we're respectful of everybody's time. First of all, we want to say that we're really, really happy to have all of the teams here. We had a very competitive application process this year. So we thank everybody for applying, and we're happy to see these teams that got through. In case it wasn't clear for our pre-communication, this webinar is intended for the teachers that have actually been selected for the program. But anybody's welcome to join to learn about the project as well if you'd like. So we're going to go over some of those details. I want to point your attention to a few important documents that you actually have already had access to. So a lot of what I'm going to refer to is not anything brand new, hopefully, to you, because it's all on the participant portal and the Google Drive that Emma has created and sent to everybody. But I just kind of want to reverberate some of these things so they will stick with you, and also point out and clarify some parts of our rules and guidelines that maybe aren't as clear or we had questions about last year. So the first document I'm going to point out, you maybe can quite see it, is the LCL participation guidelines, also accessible through the portal. This is sort of the manual for a lot of our technical rules of the competition, formatting guidelines, and what we expect in terms of citations. So to point out a few important things to make sure you have about the research paper. First, the deadline, very important. The deadline is November 28th for your research paper. Please make sure to tell your students to get the paper in by the deadline. That's important for us to give the judges full time to review, to give you all good feedback. And it's also important because we do take off a point per day that it's late. So make sure to turn it in on time so your students don't get penalized for that. If you turn it in late, that really will deduct points. Even if it's a great project, if the paper's turned in late, it'll be hard to have a successful project in terms of competition, because the points are always very close each year. It's a competitive process. So make sure that your students turn it in by November 28th. In terms of guidelines for the paper, some important things to point out is that APA is the citation style that we're requiring. Teresa is going to go over that a little more, how to do APA, what are good resources and methods for learning APA if you're not as familiar with it. We know a lot of you all are language teachers, so you may be more accustomed to MLA format, but we have some guidance on how to do APA format, because the projects themselves, even though it's in a foreign language, the projects themselves are really by nature a social science project. So that's why we've selected APA, which is more standard for social science research. The requirements for the citations and resources are, there have to be at least 5 citations or resources overall. One must be a primary source. That could be in any language. And then you have to have at least 2 sources of any sorts. They could be newspaper articles, they can be academic sources, but at least 2 of those 5 have to be in the target language. So they have to be read in Spanish, French, German, whatever you are researching. The main body of the paper, the 2 to 3 pages of the main body have to be written in the target language. And that part is 2 to 3 pages, for the Romance languages. But then we also have for addendum for Chinese and Japanese, it's actually 700 to 800 characters. And in terms of font, for Chinese, the standard Simpson font, and for Japanese, Genkoyushi. Pardon my pronunciation if I'm butchering that, I'm not as familiar with it. But those are pretty standard. Hopefully that is not a problem. We've done that in previous years. So for most of the Romance languages, it's 2 to 3 pages for the main paper. And then for Chinese and Japanese, 700 to 800 characters in those fonts that we have delineated for those 2 languages. And there's also a title page and an abstract. The title page and the abstract do not have to be written in the target language. Those can be done in English if you prefer. You can do them in the target language if you would prefer. That's completely up to you. And another important thing that is said in the guidelines is that the abstract and the title page do not count towards the 2 to 3 page maximum, nor do they count to your 700 to 800 words for the Chinese and Japanese papers. And then there's the oral presentation, which is the part that will be presented and judged the day of. That part is fairly straightforward, but in terms of coaching, we definitely recommend that that you have your students prepare a little bit in advance to do it in front of a friendly audience before they come to the judges. Our judges are trained and advised to be very friendly and approachable and constructive in their feedback. But even as friendly as they are, particularly given the age group of high school students, it's intimidating to get up in front of an audience of faculty and give a presentation. So doing this a few times in a familiar classroom setting or some other time is definitely advisable. There's also an unscripted Q&A part after your structured presentation. So make sure that they're ready to have a few questions in the target language. It has to be done in the target language. So they can't break to English. If they do, that would be points deducted. And another important point to point out about the oral presentation part is that we will deduct for teacher interference. This is something that we've mentioned in past years. The first year we didn't quite enforce it. We did enforce this last year and we will this year as well. The reason being that one of the goals of this conference is to instill a sense of self-confidence in students, let them take ownership of their language skills, of their research project, and present it themselves. And if teachers interfere, it takes away from the student's learning process. And also we found that even if a teacher means well by interfering with the judging part, that it often ends up sort of hurting their flow in terms of the presentation. That being said, if you feel like there's any issues with any of the judges, we do have a big judge pool. There's usually 50 plus people judging, a lot of people going around. We have had experiences where people felt like a judge was not fair or inaccurate. If that happens, just approach one of the program coordinators on the side. Don't interrupt the judge's experience while they're doing the presentation. Just pull us aside. Me and Emma and our other program coordinator, Shu Yi, will be around that day. So just pull us aside later. And that way you won't get a point deducted and it hopefully won't interrupt your student's presentation if that's the case. Teresa has also been a judge in previous years, so I'm sure she could answer questions about judging if you have, even if that's not the goal here. But yeah, so that's oral presentation. And the last part is the project visual. So the project visual is really, it's meant to strengthen the oral presentation. If you look at our rubric and everything, it's not the heaviest weighted part of everything. So it's not, the most important, but a good visual really can enhance the project. We've given a lot of flexibility in terms of what it could be. It could be a PowerPoint, it could be a poster, it could be a model. Within posters, there's a lot of flexibility. They can be the trifold posters, they can be a wall poster. That's really up to the students what way makes the most sense. We also don't want to require a poster of any certain format because we know that some cost more or less and resources can be an issue for students. So, it's really the execution and the content that make the difference. I don't think any one model is necessarily better than another. Whatever format your students decide to do, just make sure that it enhances their oral presentation and it reinforces the argument that they made in terms of the research paper. And Teresa will talk a little more about formulating a good argument. So just think about what visualizations, what infographics, data, pictures might enhance that. That's really what the visual part is for. And that's the creative part there. So please feel free to be creative with that and your students there. And the last quick note that I have is about judging expectations and how we will give awards. Before I actually get to the technicalities, I do want to stress that really advise your students that the participation itself is what really matters most. Just having been selected here, your teams are already competitive and impressive. We say this because each year it grows more and more, and we don't have awards for everybody. And based on last year's awards, all of the teams are usually really excellent, and the margin by which teams win each year is pretty slim. So we want to reinforce that your students are doing a great job just by participating. And we have recognition. We're going to give certificates, and we're going to give T-shirts to people for participating. So everybody will come away with something, and we also hope they'll come away with an experience. But that being said, we do give awards out for those teams that do excellent jobs. And the awards are given sort of based on two overall categories. One, we have a few technical categories, which are the language score, the scholarship score, and the visual score. So those technical categories are weighted across the board for every language, every research track. A few can win for that. And then we also have the categories for awards for each research track. So everyone who applied for the Contemporary Africa track competes with everyone else, not based on language, based on Africa. So if you are applying to do, say, Spanish, but you're doing an African research project, you'll be judged against other African research projects, no matter what the language is. We've gone back and forth with this every year, but we really feel like the most important part is the research content, in terms of what projects stand out. So that's why we put them in competition with one another. And we try to advise the judges for different languages to take into account the different language levels that they're going into. And I also want to point out that this year we have subsets of intermediate and advanced. So when we give the technical awards out in terms of language score, scholarship, visual score, they will be ranked against other people in either the intermediate or advanced category. So hopefully that will not disadvantage people that are in year 3 instead of year 4 as much. That was taken from feedback from last year's. So we are factoring in a little bit of language levels, but the languages compete with other languages. And that's the way that we've kept that this year. So Spanish will compete with Italian if they're in the same research track. And let me just double check and make sure I haven't forgotten anything else. I think that is everything that I have in terms of competition. If I've forgotten anything, I can revisit it at the Q&A. With that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Teresa Chapa, who is going to orient you a little more about the research project, writing an essay, and how to investigate good sources. Teresa?
Well, thank you for having me today. I've taken a few notes about what I did not prepare, but you mentioned that I was going to talk about. But and I can make a few comments about. To begin, I should say that I'm the Latin American and Iberian librarian. I also am the librarian for Latino Studies and Indigenous and Native American Studies here at UNC. One of the things that you mentioned that I was going to talk about, and I will talk about, is how to select a research topic, because it's not part of what I've written out, but I think it's important to just note from the experience I have with talking with students. I think one of the most important aspects is engagement. Mm-hmm. I believe if the student is interested in the topic, your outcome is going to be better. So I believe that the typical strategies for putting together a topic would include beginning with brainstorming, so that you get ideas from your group and the enthusiasm that you want to continue. And once they are engaged with the topic that you have selected, and maybe it's not specifically the topic that you will end up with, you want to get started by having ideas tossed about so that you can discuss and make decisions at some point as to whether you're going to pursue that specific topic or change it. You probably want to do some general background information, and that is something I am going to talk about in terms of finding resources that might be of interest to you in order to just get started on the topic that you're interested in, the country that you want to talk about. I also believe that once that you're focused, everybody's in sync about the topic that you want, you might want to get started before you start your research by looking for useful keywords that are going to help you do the research that you need to do. This is really important because whenever we're doing searches, when we're working with databases, when we're doing online searches, and I'm not encouraging online searches just anywhere, but online searches that are appropriate, you are going to want to use the right terms to get the information that you need. And you also need to be flexible because, as I mentioned before, you may talk about a topic that seems the perfect one, but as you do your research, you may decide to move in a different direction, rethink, refocus what you're going to talk about. So that's something that needs to be considered. Also, when you get started on putting your topic together, your paper together, you want to be sure that your topic has been defined in a way that's very focused, so that when you get started on doing the actual writing, you're very equipped with all the information that you have gathered, and you have that question in place so that you can begin the work that you need to do to put together a great paper. You also go ahead.
Just to add one little clarity where we are in the process. Teams did already select a research topic in advance.
Okay.
We can be a little flexible in terms of if you want to go a slightly different direction. Say you said you were going to investigate immigration from Morocco into Spain, and you'd later decide that you really want to look a little more at a different city, or you want to look at Tunisia instead.
Mm-hmm.
We can have a little variation. If you change your topic significantly from what you applied for, make sure to email Emma. Hopefully most people are sticking to relatively the topic that they have in advance, but email Emma in advance if there's any change in the topic. Certainly the investigation part is important, and we want to have some flexibility if you find out that you're just not finding the right resources, your students are having a really tough time with the topic. We want to be flexible with that, but for the most part, we prefer that you stick to the topics that have been identified in advance within a little wiggle room. So let us know if anything is going to change significantly with your topic.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, particularly the world region. That would be the biggest problem. Exactly. If you've identified that you're going to do Europe up front, that's the part where we really can't be flexible, because we have the teams lined up as a certain number for world regions. So if you said you were going to do Europe in advance, you can't switch to Asia at this point. I think that's the big takeaway.
I think one of the things I see is that students, when they need to be flexible, it's about the scope, because they thought they were going to be able to cover a lot more than they actually are able to cover. That's something you need to think about.
Certainly going narrower is fine. If you want to go for a more detailed, narrow argument, that is, yeah.
So I put together a guide, and I'm assuming that it has been sent out?
Yeah, it should be through we put it in the email that was sent, and it's also a link in the participant portal as well.
So it's a dynamic link. If you downloaded it yesterday, it's changed today. I added an extra bit of information. But I'm going to go through that with you now to talk about the different aspects that we need to cover in order to have a successful experience for this competition. So I begin by talking about, in the section, the tab called Writing, I have some information on how to put together a thesis statement, what a thesis statement is, and how it's important to what you're doing, your complete paper. And what I like, the term that I like that they use in the description that is used by the Writing Center here at UNC, is they call the thesis statement a roadmap for the paper. And I think that really defines it, because it's a way for you to tell the reader exactly where they're going to, what they expect from the paper, and where you're going to end up with with your thesis. So one of the things too that I think is important in your thesis statement is that you think about the significance of what you're saying and why this subject is important for you to discuss. If you look at the other thesis statement aspects that are on the a handout or the link that I've sent, you'll see that there's also a link for the handout that the UNC Writing Center actually gives to students. So I think that with that thesis statement document and with the bit of information that I give, you have a good idea as to what it's supposed to be. And as you know, the thesis statement is going to be part of your introduction. It's typically the last sentence of your introduction. I also have a little bit about what an abstract is. And an abstract allows you to elaborate on each major aspect of your paper. And it really helps the readers decide whether they want to read the rest of your paper. So it's really important that the abstract give key information. And so this is a great opportunity to synthesize. And typically it's a few sentences, it can be a paragraph, but I think typically it's 2 or 3 sentences.
We say a paragraph is the maximum, 250 words max, that's a ballpark, but yeah, I think shorter is better. I think pushing yourself to be more concise tends to work out well as long as you say what you need to say.
Right, because the important question to ask is, does your abstract tell the whole story about your study? In a synthesized format, right? So I have another link in that part of the tab that gives you a brief summary, not from UNC, but from the Purdue Online Writing Lab, which has excellent handouts as well as the Writing Center at UNC has. So both of them have excellent possibilities for you to pursue more reading about the abstract and about the thesis statement. So you have been asked to either write an argumentative or an expository essay, right? And so an argumentative essay is also called a persuasive essay. And the most important aspect of the argumentative essay is that you produce evidence. This is evidence-based writing. So the evidential support can be factual, logical, statistical, or anecdotal. And what you're trying to do is persuade. So that is what you are going to do in an argumentative essay. So the way that you do that is by establishing facts to support your argument, clarifying relevant values for your audience, which is perspective, right? Prioritizing, editing, or sequencing the facts. That's really important when you're structuring your paper. And forming and stating conclusions. So you're persuading your audience that your conclusions are based upon the agreed upon facts and shared values. So I think that, I don't know what the percentages of persuasive versus expository that you have in your competition.
Pretty even amount, and you do get a few that are more report-based. And I will say that's the most common reason that papers get marked down, particularly at the high school level. We often have students that do more of sort of reports that are sort of collections of data or sources, but they don't put it together in the argumentative format. We have had papers in the past that got dinged points for that, and that's why we are sort of clarifying what that is and what we expect. Even though as teachers, many of you probably are aware of that, we really want to be clear to communicate to students that that's what we expect in this format, not reports or summaries of anything. We don't want a summary on what the refugee crisis and wherever is. We would like an argument about, based on what I've read, this is my conclusion. And that can come in many forms. It can come as a policy recommendation. It could come as a intervention, but it needs to have some persuasive component. And also to clarify, everything that Teresa's created on this site is open access. So it can, and in fact, I'd say it probably should, at least parts be shared with your students. So please feel free to supplement whatever classroom resources you're already giving them with this. We certainly don't, I'm sure you all have taught parts of this already in terms of writing classes. But if you feel like they need particular help with one part or another, maybe they don't know APA, please feel free to share with them. This is not just meant for the teachers. We're kind of teaching you how to teach this is sort of the goal here.
So when we talk about expository essays, simply put, they are research papers. And an expository essay requires the writer to research and investigate an idea, gather supporting evidence, and present a point of view or argument on a topic. And this can be done through compare and contrast, cause and effect, or examples. So what is the difference between an argumentative and an expository essay? The argumentative essay differs from the expository in the same way that opinions differ from facts. So in an expository essay, you don't write your own beliefs or thoughts concerning a problem. You concentrate on a neutral explanation. And in an argumentative essay, then, it's the contrary. It's your opinion, and then you are giving the argument to your opinion. And so that's basically the difference between the two types of essays. So there is a section as well about the expository essay, delineating the different aspects of how to put it together, a clear and confined thesis statement, a clear and logical transitions between your introduction, your body, your conclusions, body paragraphs with evidential support, and a conclusion that does not simply just reinstate the thesis, right? And so again, another handout that you can, it's a great idea if you want to print these out for your students. The handouts that are linked at the bottom of each of these blocks of information. And that's what I have under writing, but Noel, is there anything else that needs to be covered? Just
I think the details have mostly been covered. Just to reverberate, I mean, one of the reasons why we emphasize the writing part, even though, yes, this is a language competition and one of the goals is for them to enhance their Spanish, French, people might be saying, why are we talking so much about essay formats? Well, based on previous years, that's one, what sets projects apart from another. And two, we found that if we challenge students to do a more sophisticated essay, like they would in most of their social science or other classes, is that it elevates their language. If they're having to write a more sophisticated argument in Spanish rather than just a simple summative report, it tends to be better. And we just had a question come in that says, are we asking for an argumentative essay? It could be argumentative or it can be expository. We would accept either argumentative or expository. The one thing you would be deemed points for is if it is just basically a summative report without any sort of argument or thesis that pushes forward, like as Teresa said, compare and contrast. You know, sorry, what was I had the full list. Compare and contrast, cause and effect. And examples, but even the examples part, it still needs to be, these are examples and this is why it's important. It needs to push to that next level, not just a report of this event happened, you know, in data points, X number of people were hurt in the tsunami. It needs to have that argumentative component. And we've really found that requiring both a sophisticated argument or expository essay along with the secondary language skills is what sort of pushes students to get to that next level, more than just getting up there and saying, you know, the weather is nice outside in Arabic. So that's why we want to push to that next level. That being said, we also understand as we go into the language parts, we tell judges, you know, that we tell judges that they're at level 3 or maybe a step or two above. Some of them are AP level 4, and they know what that means. A lot of these teachers have gone through different ACTFL training, so they know what language level they are. Do they expect the exact same quality or rigor as they would in English? Of course not. We know that there will be some typos. We tell them to grade at the level they're to judge at the level they're at. So we don't want it to be too intimidating, and that's also why 2 to 3 pages or 700 to 800 words is hopefully not too super long. For most papers or competitions of the sort, they would expect a longer paper. So we sort of reduced what we thought was the standard amount for a competition in terms of word length, but we still expect an argumentative or expository essay.
So the next tab that I have on the document I prepared is citing. And I must admit that I am not familiar with the APA style because I am in the humanities as well. But I did note it so that you have this information, what is available through a great handout from, again, Purdue's online writing lab. And I guess the most important aspect that you've already discussed are the 4 elements that are necessary for an APA style document. And those are the title page, an abstract, the main body, and references. So if you look at the link that is provided to you, and you go to the Purdue Writing Lab page on the APA format, you're going to get a great summary of what it is. You're going to get the guidelines. You're going to get citation examples, the basic citation examples, and more elaborate ones. You're going to be able to virtually be able to format any document that you use or any text that you use into a citation. And I don't believe that it's pretty straightforward. I don't think that it really differs a whole lot between, for example, MLA style, but there are specific differences that need to be noted. You just need to follow the formula, is what I would say. So no questions about that? No.
Any other questions about citations?
This page also has samples, which is great. So you're going to be able to look at the rules and then how they're applied. So I think that really will help you put together your own documentation.
Yeah, and in terms of, I know there are citation machines out there, and we don't officially encourage those. We would tell people it's best to do the citations manually, but if they're used, make sure to cross-reference with the final format, because not all of the citation machines end up putting out the bibliography the way they ought to be. Not officially condoned, but certainly make sure that you're double checking that by the format. And in the end of the day, on the rubric, APA style, it counts for a few points. It's probably not going to make or break the competition, but we would encourage you to go by the format of APA if you want to get the full points, because that is what we're asking.
To college, they are going to be asked to use the different formats, depending on the subject that they're.
I had to use APA Chicago and MLA all in my first year.
Right.
So being able to switch back and forth between the differences, between different styles is sort of important. So the question, I guess everybody can see the question, but can my group have appendices for maps, photos, etc.? Will there be deductions? I think that the appendices are fine if you want to. I think that goes with the sources. You can still, there's an APA formatting for appendices if you want to have a few like photos, maps, or whatever. I would encourage you to keep most of them in terms of your visual. It would be great if you use them, on your visual as well, because that's really sort of the space for the visual parts in terms of maps, photos. That's where they would probably be most effective. But if you feel like, having that document, whatever it be a map or a photo, is really essential for someone to understand your research paper, it's okay to have appendices. The body of the text is what we really look for, the 2 to 3 pages or 700 to 800 words. So I don't think we would deduct for that. That's fine.
So the next tab that I've included, and it's in the version that I put up today. So if you downloaded for any reason yesterday, you may not have this tab. I have a section on evaluating your sources. And this comes from the University of California at Santa Cruz. And I believe the information is very useful because a lot of students believe that they can go on the internet and find good content for their, I don't know if they think of it as good content, but they find content and they're willing to use it sometimes in their academic work. And so it's very important for you to steer them from that and remind them that what they're looking for are articles that are scholarly or academic in scope, and that when they're in doubt, maybe they should consult you and see what you think about the content. One of the things that I know that happens with our students here is that they don't distinguish between what is commercial and what is academic. And one of the ways that you can help your students is by reminding them that anything that's a .com is suspicious because it's commerce, it's business, it's not academic. But you'll see that there are some very useful hints as to how to figure out what is worthy of being included in your research. They talk about, I think this is used quite often, the CRAP test, which is it current? So the currency, the timeliness of the information, reliability of the information, the authority, who's written it, how accurate is it, and is it supported by evidence, which is probably one of the most important aspects. The purpose of the information, so that would bring in the intent of the website. Why is it up? Why are they trying to persuade you in this one way? And if there are ads on the website, then that might be a clue to the fact that it's not a reliable source. Anyway, this UC Santa Cruz handout will be very useful to you, I hope. This does not mean to say that you are not going to want them to use newspapers or magazines. They may be relevant, so you just have to have a discussion, I guess, about that and decide if it's something that's appropriate for the, is it the evidence you need for your paper?
I think most successful projects have some balance of sources. They don't use all one type. So it's useful to have a few different types of sources. So you can certainly use 1 or 2 journal articles, but not New York Times articles, but not all New York Times articles. And in terms of the judges Q&A in the past, I think one of the things that judges asked the most questions about were sources, because, it's not, they would say, well, why is this a reliable source? Where did you get this information from? And that doesn't mean that it's not reliable, but they want to see that students can articulate that, this was an academic article that had a big sample size. They surveyed 1,000 people, so we know that we have a big applicant or big survey pool. So we know that this is a good set of data and it has reliable information from the target population. That's much better than just, uncited sources or New York Times articles say that doesn't really say how many people were surveyed or when the data was collected from. So you kind of have to balance that. But questions about sources probably are some of the most common questions we get at the judges Q&A. And I want to acknowledge one question here. If the source is not in English, should they include it in English? Not to translate it into the target language. I guess I'm not sure. The citations can all be in English, but you can also keep the title in The title can be in the target language as well. That's also fine. I think normally, just for integrity of the source, usually it's cited in the target language. And remember again that the paper itself, the body of the paper, the 2 to 3 pages, has to be written in the target language. Yes, the exception is quotation. So, for instance, you're writing your paper in English, or excuse me, in Spanish, but there's an English quotation. You could still keep the quotation in English, but the rest of the argument, your body needs to be in Spanish. If the original language was English and you're quoting it directly, it's okay to keep it in English. But otherwise, the 2 to 3 page body of the paper is expected to be in the target language. And then in terms of citations, I would just keep the citations in the original language it was in. So if you used a French source, keep the citation title in French. If you use an English source, keep it in English, because that respects the integrity of the original resource. So if the judge or whomever was to go back, they could find, I mean, the main point of a citations page is, can I go back and find where this person found this and cross-reference it? So you want to keep the original title in that language, I think.
Great. So the following sections are all based on the area studies, areas that you are covering. What I did was I subdivided the way that the competition is subdivided. And so I have Africa, Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, Middle East and North Africa, Europe, meaning Western Europe, and then Russia and East Europe. So under each of those tabs, you're going to find 3 consistent boxes. And one of the reasons that I'm glad that we're talking about evaluating resources is that one of the boxes that each tab has is a reference to NC Live resources. And if you're not familiar with NC Live resources, they're free electronic access resources that we have in the state of North Carolina, and your students, I would encourage your students to utilize these databases because they are meant for just this kind of project. There are incredible resources for area studies in NC Live. NC Live then, through the public library, means that the student, all they have to do, they can be at home, they can be wherever, they just need to have a library card and a PIN number, and with that or password. And with that password, they are going to be able to get into the resources. I wanted to note some of the ones that I think are the most relevant so that you get the idea of just how much content is available. And of course, this is the content that you want to steer them to instead of going on the internet if they're looking for articles, because they're all, they've been vetted and they are academic in their scope, right? And so they include, for the areas, East and Central Europe database, East and South Asia database, Latin America and Iberia database, and Middle East and Africa database. So I know that our students on campus here use these databases frequently because they really do have quite a bit of content and they're very multidisciplinary. The other databases that NC Live has, and actually there are so many more, but I only chose a few to point out to you because I believe that I could go on for quite a bit of time just talking about NC Live. ProQuest Central is one that is very good for your students to use because it is a very general, multidisciplinary database. And I should mention that the content is not only in English, it can be in the vernacular languages of the world areas. The New York Times is there from 1980 to the present. So if you're looking for newspaper articles, this is a good source as well. And then there's an international news stream. In each section, I talk about newspapers that are available, but you also have quite a bit of availability through this international news stream. So that's NC Live. The other two parts of under each country or each world area that are stable that I include in all of them are a link to the area studies programs here on campus. In two cases, they're Duke and UNC, right? And also country guides. There are 2 country guides that I offer. One is from the Library of Congress, and the other is from the BBC Country Profiles. And they're just very general bits of information about the different world countries, and you'd be able to find the ones that you're most interested in. And from that point on, I go into the online resources that are available. For most of the areas, I've been able to select dictionaries. Of course, everything is open access, so you should not have any issues with getting in. In a few cases, I actually give you a page that has more than one reference within it. For example, under the category dictionaries for Africa, I actually give a link to Columbia University's African Languages Resources, and that has many dictionary options as well as other options that might be of value to your students. I include newspapers. In some cases, the link I've given gives you more than one newspaper to select. And if there is something available in terms of a portal with information, I've also given that. So to put these together, I've talked to my colleagues who cover these areas in the library. So I believe that what I've given you is information that's appropriate for what you're trying to do. And I'm trying to think of what I have to say. Oh, for Western Europe, I should point out that I have given 4 different boxes representing 4 different languages. So you've got German, and you've got French, Italian, and Spanish. And then, as I did in all cases, again, dictionaries, newspapers, and portals if there's one available. I'm most familiar with Latin America and the Caribbean. Not that I'm partial, but I will point out that in the case of that Latin America and the Caribbean, many times when you look for content, the 2 areas are put together. So I did also include, when I did find, for example, in newspapers of the Caribbean, I actually put a link that limits it to only Caribbean newspapers. And then I have another link to newspapers that includes the Caribbean as well as the rest of Latin America. The dictionaries, I'm not thrilled about because I had to use open access content in most cases, and they're full of ads. I'm not happy about that, but I really had no choice. So I hope that you have good dictionaries in your libraries that you can use as well.
Yeah, to make one note that we made last year about just online translators in general, dictionary is different from full online translators like Google Translate. It's an important distinction. I mean, there are things like wordreference.com and Lingui. If students want to use that for individual vocabulary, looking up a word, or looking up synonyms for a word, I think that is fine. I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one because most of y'all are language teachers, but we highly discourage the use of online translators for anything more than a word or 2. Definitely not Google Translate or anything like that for 2 reasons. One, it discourages the active learning of the language, of course, because students aren't challenging themselves to learn new sentence structures, new vocabulary. But 2, they're often not really great. They often don't account for certain context issues. They don't account for cultural issues. They often have weird word choice that will be very evident if they use online translators for more than a vocabulary word or 2. So we highly discourage the use of online translators for phrases or sentences. Only use online dictionaries or anything for individual words, because that's really part of the learning process, and it will also, I think, ultimately show in your final project if they've relied too much on online assistance tools.
I should note that under Russian, I do have something that's similar to Google Translate. Yandex is the site. The Slavic librarian at UNC suggested it, and I went ahead and put it on, even though he did say that he found it a bit lacking, just like Google Translate is lacking. But he did also want me to point out, I asked him for a portal. You won't find a portal under Russian online sources, but he pointed again to Yandex, and he said anything that you need, you would be able to find there. I don't know how many Russian groups we have.
We only have one, I believe.
Okay. Okay.
But that one team matters. So if you have questions, we can connect you with the right people. We've kind of designed this as a general webinar for everybody, but of course, if you want to follow up specifically with a specific language or world region, we can do our best to put you in touch with the librarian or faculty here at UNC if they're willing. Most of our librarians are awesome and they're willing to talk to people off campus if they can. So please feel free to reach out if there's specific questions. We're at about 5 minutes till time. I think maybe we want to open for questions. Is that good? Okay. So please feel free to put your questions over there. Also want to reverberate for anyone that joined us late. If you haven't already, please state your name and your school and what language your team is doing, because that's our way of recording that you attended. We will give CEU credits for the teachers that attended the webinar, but we have to know you're here. So please chime in and give us at least your name and school and the language you're doing. And also, if you have any questions, please put them over there in the chat section. Again, I'm also checking my email. If for whatever reason people are having issues with the chat function, you're welcome to email me.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also just to encourage, and I mean, a last word, if people don't have questions, that you all are the experts in your language, and we do want to empower you. We know that you know a lot of this already. We just kind of wanted to compile an organized source of resources for people to share with their students, particularly if you're language teachers. We know you don't have a ton of time in your days to organize this because you're busy teaching multiple sections, lots of students. We do have one question over there. Let's see. Do you encourage electronic style presentations? Is there not a screen to project them on? We do not discourage the electronic presentations at all. It doesn't disadvantage you. The one thing we do ask is that you let us know in advance if you plan on doing an electronic presentation, to make sure we have a limited number of projectors and we can set that up. We can set up a classroom or a projector with a classroom for you to do that. So it's not disadvantaged or discouraged. You can certainly use a PowerPoint. Just let us know in advance so we can make sure that we have the proper AV for you to set that up on. So be in touch with Emma or me if you're going to do an electronic presentation, so we can know. Yeah. Okay, and one comment that love to have this webinar early in the process. So we have the webinars recorded from last year as well, so you can revisit. It's not incredibly different. We do like to do it early in the process. The only reason that we don't do it too much earlier is because we have a lot of teams that apply and don't end up going through the process. So we also don't want to get teams too far along the research project. But I take that point that maybe a little more time between when the application is confirmed and then when the final project is done. We could try to do it a little bit earlier next year to make sure. But the paper date is a little bit later than it was last year. So you do still have to the 28th. Last year, I think it was due somewhere like the 21st. So we've given people through after Thanksgiving. Hopefully that gives people a little more time to make last minute changes. And as we noted, it's okay to shift your research focus a little bit, particularly if it's narrower. If you're going into a narrower topic, your students are fine to do that. But if it is going to be, completely different, we really can't do changing of the world regions this late in the process. You need to stick to your world region and language at the very least. But other proposals, are okay. If you go a little bit, other changes are good if you go a little bit narrower. Yeah. All right, well, I'll hang out for just one last minute. If there's other question that pops up, I'll look at the questions for another minute or two. Otherwise, thank you. I think that's pretty much all we needed to cover. We look forward to meeting everybody. Also wanted to let you know that Emma will be mailing, if she hasn't already, she'll be emailing information about the school support. That's specific to each school. We do different support levels depending on where you're coming from and depending on whether or not you're Title I or rural. So we'll be in touch with you individually on what support we're offering, but we're able to offer pretty generous support thanks to our different grants this year. So we hope everybody has enough support to get your students here and to prepare. If there's extenuating financial circumstances, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and Emma. We'll do everything we can to make sure that you have the resources to get your students here on the day of. We don't want that to be the worry. We want this to be an enjoyable experience for your students, and a great experience for them and for you as well as teachers to bring your students here. I'm sure you're all very proud of the projects that they're doing and getting to see this come to fruition in a applied practical setting. So thank you all for the work you're doing, and we're glad to have you. Look forward to meeting you and on December 12th. Thanks so much, everybody.